Hey, what's up? My name is MacDonald, and just a few videos ago, I was talking about being more like an infant. And I was thinking through that, and I was like, I don't want to encourage people to be childish, but I do want to encourage them to be childlike. And I got to thinking, not too long ago, I think it was the beginning of last year, I read this book called Play the Man by Mark Batterson. And it's part of Fight Club, and that's how I got that sword right there. And this book was so good that I think every man should read it. And it teaches like 7 virtues on how to be a man that's more like Christ. And so I'm not going to go through the whole book, but the first one is about having tough love and being tough as nails. But then the second chapter is about childlike wonder, which is kind of what I was talking about in that previous video about being more like an infant. And so when we look through this, there's a lot of people that are know-it-alls. They think they know everything. They got to be right about everything. Here it says, faith is not mindless. Faith is mindful. Half-minded is no better than half-hearted. So 1/4 of the Great Commandment involves the mind, and loving God with all your mind includes the right brain and the left brain. It also includes the medial, ventral, prefrontal cortex. What does all that mean? Well, that's the seat of humor. And so don't be a know-it-all who has to be right. Be somebody that jokes and laughs and has fun and sees the interesting stuff within things and be willing to learn. It also talks about being a gentleman because Jesus was a true gentleman. It talks about being a genius. How can you become a genius? Well, not by knowing it all. You got to know more, and you got to know more over and over. And then it talks about true worship rather than an empty worship. And so when you're worshiping God, when you're lost in His presence and you're just pouring your love out to Him and showing your adoration for Him, that's really not what most people would see as manly. Manly is, in this day and age, in this world, is seen as somebody that's fighting or knocking down a tree with their fists, not somebody that's on their knees crying out saying, I love you, God. But this says a true man does that because we saw Jesus do that. And it talks about how Teddy Roosevelt read a book a night when he was president. That's amazing. And why would he do that? He would do that so that he would be able to have more effective conversations with people that were visiting the White House. And so there's a stone called the Manhood Stone. And I want to read that to you, what it says on that Manhood Stone. It's at the Theodore Roosevelt Museum or Memorial at Theodore Roosevelt Island. And it says, a man's usefulness depends upon his living up to his ideals insofar as he can. It is never hard to fail, but it is worse never to have tried to succeed. All daring and courage, all iron endurance of misfortune make for a finer and nobler type of manhood. Only those who are fit to live, who do not fear to die, and none are fit to die who have shrunk from the joy of life and the duty of life. Teddy Roosevelt. And so childishness is bad, but childlikeness is good. And so Paul writes in the Bible, when I was a child, I talked like a child. I thought like a child. I reasoned like a child. When I became a man, I put the ways of childhood behind me. So when I say be more like an infant, I'm not saying be immature. I'm not saying be childish. I'm not saying going around and say goo goo gaga to people. I'm saying have some joy of life and be pure of the layers that we've built up. And so being playful is a part of playing the man, it says. It's good to be playful, but it's not good to not take responsibility. And then it says, Paul uses 3 verbs. When I was a child, I talked like a child, talk. When I was a child, I thought like a child, think. And when I was a child, I reasoned like a child, reason. The challenge is this: the part of the brain responsible for consequential thinking, the prefrontal or the frontal cortex, doesn't fully develop in men until their mid-20s. So 2/3 of the battle is dealing with a maturing mind that is incapable of meeting the demands of manhood. Simply put, Teenage boys are at an intellectual disadvantage when it comes to consequential thinking. I was one of them. And if you're a man listening to this, so were you. Or maybe you are now. We did dumb stuff, even by our own standards. So, 2 questions. How can I become more childlike? And how can I become less childish? If you only figure out one of those questions, you'll be half the man that you could be. One way to do that is by wondering about things. I remember my grandfather would take me out to the desert where he had a motorhome, and he would pan for gold, mine for gold, and I would lay on top of that motorhome. And in the desert of Arizona, there's absolutely no lights anywhere. And so the stars are just so abundant in that sky. And I remember laying on that motorhome, looking up at those stars, just being lost in wonder. And at that time, I wanted to be an astronaut so bad. Later on, I figured out that I'm too short to do that. They make astronaut suits that are around 5'10" for the average male. I'm 5'6", so being an astronaut wasn't in my cards. But I can still look at the stars and wonder. I remember when we lived at the MacDonald house. I'd drive home late at night from a meeting, and I'd fall out of my car and just look up at the sky and just be lost in wonder. And when my wife, Stephanie, and I, we went to North Carolina for our honeymoon and for our first anniversary, just walking up to the coast of the ocean, smelling the sea salt, tasting the salt on your lips, and then seeing the vastness of that big body of water, the waves coming in. You're just lost in wonder looking at that. And when I look at my beautiful wife, Stephanie, sometimes I'm lost in wonder because God has blessed us with such amazing, beautiful things, and we should be lost in wonder. So be more childlike, less childish, be more like an infant, less like yourself. But once again, I think you are amazing and you should be yourself, just not yourself with all the layers. So do whatever you can to develop and grow and become the greatest version of yourself. One way to do that is by reading this book, Play the Man. If you're a woman, then you read this book, I'm going to call you brother. Just to close this video out, I love you guys. I believe in you. I'll see you at the top, so I'll see you real soon.